It's one of the saddest ironies that we, in our unbelievably, almost overwhelming love of our children, and in an attempt to create some sort of advantage for them, we're baking in long-term disadvantage. We think we need to protect our children. And the answer to that is yes, of course, from starvation and moving cars and juggling chainsaws. There are things that are legitimately dangerous, but we are not there to protect them from any discomfort or any pain or any sadness. What we need to do is not protect, but prepare.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners. This week on the podcast for episode 129, I'm bringing you a conversation with Steve Baskin about raising strong, anti-fragile kids. Steve and his wife, Susie, are the owners and executive directors of Camp Champions in Marble Falls, Texas. Steve has an interesting background for a camp professional. Though he describes himself as a lifelong camper, he actually spent several years as an investment banker before returning to Harvard Business School and then eventually purchasing a camp that he and his wife have operated for the past few decades. Steve is passionate about youth development, and he frequently contributes articles to publications like Psychology Today, The Wall Street Journal, The Houston Chronicle, and more. He's a frequent presenter at camp industry conferences and even has a TED Talk about the importance of kids getting unplugged. I'm thrilled to welcome Steve Baskin, or as they call him at Camp Champions, Steve Sir, to the podcast today. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Steve, you are very well known in the camp industry and beyond. But for my listeners who may not know you, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself and your background, and your camp too?
Okay. Well, I won't do the whole long origin story. I grew up in West Texas. I was a not very confident 8-year-old that was sent away to camp. And at camp, a young man helped me discover it was wonderful to be who I was. And I fell in love with camp as an experience, went to camp for 11 years, but then was sidetracked into the world of finance. So I went to Davidson College and then worked at Goldman Sachs. That was before I think it was considered a bad word. Certainly before it was controversial. And then I worked at another investment bank and then went to get a graduate degree at Harvard Business School. And while there, I realized while I was good at finance, I only had one life and I wanted to do something that made my heart beat faster. And I kept thinking back to all the lessons that camp had brought me. And I began to think, what if you sort of brought some of the analysis that I learned from some of my other jobs and benchmarking and all this kind of things to a place where you can have real positive impact on kids. So in 1993, I did something I swore I would never do, which is start a camp from scratch. I figured only a fool would do that, but we couldn't find one to buy. 2 years later, we bought another camp that's called Camp Champions, which is the one that my wife and I own and operate now. And I've spent about the last 27 years trying to figure out what it is that the camp experience can do for children and how you can do it better. And what that's done is sort of force us to think in terms of how does the human brain work? How do kids develop? And it's made me sort of a I guess, an amateur psychologist.
Oh, I think you're beyond that now. You had so many great sessions that I've been to. I remember going to one that you talked about the power of moments, and it was before the Power of Moments book, I think, came out. You were talking about creating really intentional ways to help kids remember things that they've learned at camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that. I've learned a lot from you and from your blog posts and your sessions at camp conferences. So I think, we have a lot in common in that we take this camp thing very seriously and are always thinking about how we can better deliver the social, emotional, life skills growth that kids need at camp.
Absolutely.
So today what I wanted to talk to you about is you wrote this great essay, which I think is yet to be published, but we're going to talk about it, and I'll put a copy with our show notes, but
Right.
It's called A Manifesto to Strength. So why don't you talk a little bit about just kind of where your thoughts have come on this whole concept of kind of fragility of kids and what we need to do to raise kids who aren't so fragile?
Well, it is. This is something that's been rattling around in my brain for about 20 years, and largely because our ownership of camp kind of coexisted with our journey as parents. My wife and I have 4 children, so we're underachievers compared to your family, but we still have a decent data set, right?
Barely underachievers. We're only one ahead of you.
Well, but still, but we've got 23-year-old twins, 21-year-old, and an 18-year-old, and I was lucky enough to have been raised by the wisest woman I ever met, who took parenting really, really seriously. And, she helped me look at our kids and say, what do I want true about them? And then I could see that through a filter as I would look at, over 1,000 kids each summer. And I would begin to say, gee, I really like the way that Linda responds in those difficult situations. And I really don't like the way that Jonathan responds in those situations. And I wonder what their parents were doing or what the environment might be doing that made them these different ways. And one of the things I began to see early on, though I didn't have a title for it, was overparenting. First the helicopter parenting, and then the snowplow or lawnmower parenting. I'm sure y'all talked about the differences there, but one is just you're watching child's every motion, and then you're actually trying to manage your child's experience and prepare the road for your child instead of your child for the road. And I saw that as being problematic. We ourselves joke that we have a rule of parenting through laziness. If you think your child can do it, let them. If you suspect they might be able to, let them. If you think there's an off chance, let them. It's only if it's dangerous and you're 100% sure of failure, do you not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that.
So,
well, and I think when you have more kids in your family, I think it's almost helpful because people like you and me, if we only had one kid, it could be kind of scary for that poor child, right? We might
absolutely
be putting too much on them. And when you have multiple kids, everyone kind of needs to help out. And you, as a parent, you're not going to be looking at all their homework and all that stuff because there's just not enough time in the day.
Absolutely.
So I think that's sort of a helpful aspect of it.
Well,
I'm with you on this. I think that there are kids, and you do get this front row seat when you meet all these different kids, and especially the counselors
mm-hmm.
too. You really see by the time they're in our workforce
mm-hmm.
the difference between and it's not all parenting. Some of it is just the way personalities and what people are prone to, and then the parents adapt. And so I don't think you can't just blame everything on parents saying or doing something.
Absolutely.
But I think there are definitely things that we can do to help make sure our kids aren't so fragile. Before we go on and hear your tips, I just want to share, we just finished this ACA conference last week. And, there's a lot of different sessions, and a big, big conversation is now about our staff and their mental health and, what they need from us in order to, be okay working at camp. And one of the sessions my husband went to, there were names for these things, but basically they were saying that the college kids coming in to work at our camps, they're used to being able to kind of pull the emergency hatch, and they can give us a signal of some type saying that they need an immediate break. They need a break to recharge. And then there was another thing that they need to be able to just know that at any time when they need it, they can take an hour. And, you can have this in your health center, or you can have this. And, and And I get it that there are definitely times when someone, they have a loss in the family, or there's times when you definitely do need a break from your regular job. But in general, I find myself feeling frustrated that why can't they just be like we were when we were counselors? Yeah, we got tired and we had to figure things out and we had some hard days. And, it was that kind of resilience that was just more, I guess, kind of expected then. And now I feel like I feel like we're setting the expectations almost lower by kind of telling people, oh, you need this place, you need this rest place. Oh, you're going to need much more rest than we needed. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right on the observation. I would change the analysis just slightly. I think that the college campuses are responding to what they're getting. I think the horse is already out of the barn by the time the kids get there, and they have had their parents get on the phone and talk to the teachers. They've had the parents adjudicate their friendships. They've had their college applications co-authored, I generously use, by their parents. So they've been used to having someone saying, if it's too much for you, sweetheart, I'm there for you. Mom and dad are here. We're going to protect you. And it sends a really deleterious signal. I mean, I think the way I put it is, it's one of the saddest ironies that we, in our unbelievably, almost overwhelming love of our children, and in an attempt to create some sort of advantage for them, we're baking in long-term disadvantage. And, we think we need to protect our children. And the answer to that is yes, of course, from starvation and moving cars and juggling chainsaws. There are things that are legitimately dangerous. But we are not there to protect them from any discomfort or any pain or any sadness. What we need to do is not protect, but prepare. And in my mind, as you know, I'm kind of a geek. So I have this chart, right? And on the y-axis, you have amount of parental effort. And on the x-axis, we have the age of your child, starting at 0 all the way to, say, 25. And there are only 2 lines on it. One line represents the protect and provide. And the other one represents prepare. And when you're handed that delicate baby on day 1, you better be in the protect and provide business. You're not going to toss them on the ground and prepare them for life. You're just getting them, make sure they're not hurt and they're fed. But every day after that, we ought to be protecting and providing just a little bit less and preparing a little bit more. And what I found is parents tend to continue to protect and provide, protect until 14 minutes before high school graduation. And then it just drops off and then we're sent off to college. So that's a little, and by the way, I'm saying all of this as a general trend. You and I have both seen it. So it is a general trend. It's not all kids. There are some kids on both our staff that are as tough as anyone you'll ever want. But they have been subject to a parenting trend that equates protection from discomfort with protection from danger.
Yes.
And it makes loving parents create fragile children.
Yeah. I will say, I think in general, the kids that we see at our camps are less fragile than the general population. I think that parents who are even willing to let their kids go to camp, like resident camps like ours, are already sort of ahead of the game in terms of, there's some people who would never think to let their 8 or 10-year-old be away from them for a couple weeks. And I think that we probably get and I've seen that too. I mean, I think most of our campers are really pretty darn amazing in terms of their resilience. I think kids who come to camp in general, or they grow it from being there, either way. But I do think that it sort of helps with that experience does help. In your essay, you talk about camp and you say, we want camp to be full of friendships, laughter, fun, and activities. But we also know it is a powerful place to build internal strength. I use strength rather than resilience for a reason. Resilience simply means that you are no worse after a challenge. If we are indeed anti-fragile, we should emerge from a challenging situation stronger. So you talk about then some of the things that kind of happen at camp, and I wonder if we can talk about them and also talk about how they translate to things that parents can do to just kind of help our kids get stronger and stronger as you drop off on that protect and provide, and you increase the letting them do more for themselves, which I think of that same graph, although in my mind, it was always like more responsibility is on the same trajectory as more independence.
Right.
I think a lot of kids think, oh, I'm 16. I want to drive the family car.
Right.
And my theory is, okay, yeah, you can start driving the family car. And that also comes along with you're going to the grocery store and you're going to pick up the things. And then you can make dinner once a week for the family too, because you are getting more grown up. You have more, you can do some of these adult tasks that have been parental tasks now start getting transferred to you. So it's the same idea. That's something that now I don't need to drive you to your orthodontist checkup or whatever it might be. So yes, you can have the privilege and the independence of driving the car, and you can make the appointment and get to your appointment. That kind of thing. So
exactly.
I've thought of the same idea of just this. It's just hard though. I think one of the things that I really do understand where parents think, because don't you sometimes, like, you look at your kid and when you see them every day, you can still kind of look at them and see that baby.
Oh my gosh. This is like one of my favorite observations I joke with parents all the time that when I see your 9-year-old daughter, I see a 9-year-old. But when you see your 9-year-old daughter, you see the weighted average of all your memories.
Yes.
Now,
yeah.
So your memories of them as a 1 and 2 year old, you've lost most of them. You only have 1 or 2 of those, and you have a few of when they did the stupid thing when they were 4. But when you look at your 9-year-old, you're seeing a 7.5 or 8-year-old. And we can't completely update because there's no morning you just woke up and suddenly said, wow, I have a young adult.
Yeah, you sometimes have that. I don't know if you've had this when you're like, kids are really like, all of a sudden they're like taller than you are, or they walk by and you just get a glance of them and like, who's that adult that just walked by in my house? And you're just like, sometimes you have these moments where like, wow, what happened to my little kid? They're suddenly so grown up. But I almost think that it's so much easier with other people's kids who you don't see every day.
It's so much easier.
So like when we see a kid come back, as a junior counselor and then as a counselor, it's like we're watching this kid. Oh, they're getting older. They're getting more mature. But I think it's harder as a parent, even with my own kids. Sometimes I find myself asking them questions and they're like, Mom, of course I know how to do that. Or whatever. Like, I was like, oh, I just kind of forgot for a moment that you're, 16 or 18 or whatever you are.
Exactly. Well, before we go on to answer your question before, I will say, this, that because we run summer camps, we never had a summer vacation with our kids. So on 2 occasions, my wife and I taken our kids on a 5 months backpacking. And the reason I mentioned that is that forced us so that the weighted average of our memories were heavily back and loaded toward real experiences. So on those 2 trips, I came out of them knowing actually how old my kids were. But then, like, for the next 3 or 4 years, I'd be kind of frozen in the memory right after these heavily exposed areas. So, I don't know what the answer to that question is. But back to your original question on resilience and strength. Before I answer the question about what camps can do, I want to unpack one word that was buried in that paragraph, and the word is anti-fragile. And by the way, you have such a fantastic mind and imagination, a gift with language. Or maybe someone listening to the sound of my voice can come up with a better term than anti-fragile. I actually think it is wonky and ugly, but the idea of it is that parents tend to think in terms of a binary. I don't want a fragile child. I want a resilient child. And that misses a third, much more ambitious and exciting axis. Fragile is what happens if you drop crystal glass on the ground. It breaks. If you drop a Solo cup, nothing happens. It's not better. It's not worse. It's the same. It's resilient. Anti-fragile is something that, when exposed to stress or challenge or difficulty, actually becomes stronger. So your immune system is anti-fragile. You get exposed to a disease and you're less likely to get it in the future. Your muscles are anti-fragile. Your bones, as we see with astronauts that come back down, they are brittle because they haven't been exposed to gravity. And the human soul, the human psyche, is anti-fragile. And we need to experience challenges and get through them to know that we're capable of it. And actually just to build that sort of psychic muscle. So some of the examples I talk about is, I want your child to be homesick and then get over it. Because I want, when they're 18 years old and someone on their freshman hall at college is crying their eyes out because they're homesick, that they'll be the one doing the comforting. I want your child to get in a dispute. I used to say the word fight, but then parents of 4th grade boys get into a No, I'm not talking about physical fights. I'm talking about yelling, disagreement, maybe stomping foot, running out with a friend, and then adjudicate it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The counselors aren't going to come in and play translator. They're going to watch. They're going to be loving, supportive, but they're going to let you do it on your own. I want them to, fail at something and then know through perseverance and try again, they can overcome that failure. And I also want, one of my favorites, and this is what I needed, is fail at something and then realize, you know what, I'm never going to be great at this, and that's okay. We're not all going to be Steph Curry or Stephen Hawking, and that's all right. We don't have to be the best at any one thing or the best at everything to be fantastic human beings. So those are sort of the 4 examples I brought out. But at home, I remember Susie one time, the classic, take the kid to kindergarten in the pajamas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that happened. Mm-hmm. That happened the best. And will you come deliver my homework? Our kids just said, don't even call. Don't even call. It's not going to work. But first of all, who cares if you go to 0 in 2nd grade?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
But people, they overestimate the importance of that and underestimate the importance of getting the 0 and realizing that the world doesn't end and remembering it the next day.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that we are, it gets back to, we want our children to avoid any short-term discomfort, but at the cost of long-term capability. And I'll give you, this is sort of a harder example, but I'm going to go there. Is I remember one person said, well, aren't you, there's some, bad people out there. I go, yeah, there are some bad people out there. They're asking, why would I be willing to travel? Knowing that, we had kids that were, 14, 13, and 10. The world's full of scary people. I said, you know what? I'll take the 1 in 100 million chance that my children run into somebody who wants nefarious injury for them, than take the 1 in 1 chance that they'll think the world is a scary place that isn't worth examining. I'd rather have them think the world is an adventure and know that everything's not going to be perfect. And, I don't believe that, a stranger is going to come up and do a horrible thing. But if you constantly say that message, you make fragile children who are scared of the world.
Yeah. Gosh.
And when it comes time for them to go into the workplace or go into college or go do something bold and exciting, they're going into a world that's scary. They're going into a world that they're not prepared for. And by the way, scary in their mind, that they're not prepared for in their mind. And our opportunity is to have confidence that they'll bounce back.
I think it's the risk tolerance thing. I think parents now have like 0. Some parents have almost 0 risk tolerance. They're thinking about all the things that could possibly go wrong instead of all the learning and growth that could go right. And I mean, Lenore, we were talking before we started recording about Lenore Skenazy and John Haidt. Is that his last name?
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt and the Let Grow site. And a lot of the message that they have is that we have a lot of fears that are unfounded. We've been kind of inundated with very, scary, sad stories. But like you said, the chances of those happening to your child are very, very small. But our perception, because they're so heavily saturate the media when something does happen, it gives us the perception that it's more likely to happen to our child. And I remember reading Lenore's book, Free Range Kids, way back when, like 10 years ago. And her talking about how, statistically crimes and everything are down. And so when people say, oh, the good old days when I could just run around all day until dinner time, well, actually, the kids could still do that now. And if they were on their bikes, they'll be wearing helmets now. So they'll be safer than we were, So, so there's just this, but I get it, because I've seen that stuff too. You watch Dateline enough times or Law and Order, and you're like, oh my gosh, the world is so scary. But so I can see where parents have that. And I think they then feed off of each other. And that's that whole thing where, wait, you let your child walk to the park by themselves, or you go on a trip to Europe or backpacking with your kids when they're 10, people will question you. So as a parent, you have to really be ready to respond. Yes, I'm sending my 8-year-old to camp because it's just such a great experience for him. And, need to be able to almost defend your choices when you're a parent who's allowing your kids these opportunities.
Well, this is going to be a little cynical, but it's almost like, oh my gosh, the outside world is so dangerous. The obvious thing for me to do is keep my child inside eating snacks and playing on the Game Boy. So I'm going to swap the 1 in 100 million chance of, a stranger do something horrible for a 1 in 20 chance of type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
But we never measure it that way.
Yeah. There's a risk. Life is a risk. Every day you wake up, you're picking which one. And you're right. I think the default that we're picking for our children is leading to a lot of problems for them because they're not healthy. They're not healthy emotionally or physically, really.
Well, and I'm sure we all are fretting about social media, and my struggle with that is it's sort of hacked our evolutionary wiring. The same way that Haagen-Dazs or Pringles have hacked our wiring for fats, sugars, and salts, so that we will eat foods we were evolved to want. We want human connection, and I think that Snapchat is to human connection what Pringles is to nutrition. It feels almost like food. And then you do a whole lot of it and you feel bad afterwards.
Yeah, right? That's a really good analogy. Oh, I like that. You've been thinking about that one. That's a good one. I wanted to, so when you were talking about the anti-fragile thing, it reminded me of something. So there's a guy, Richard Watts, he wrote this book, Entitlemania, and I had him on the podcast before. And he gave a really good analogy that he talked to a group of parents before I talked to them, like he had been there a couple months before, and they told me about it. And it's really stuck with me. And I think it's great for parents to think about that. So palm trees, they're in like these tropical settings that get lots of storms with very big winds. And if you watch a palm tree in a storm, it just like can sway, like it's just very like malleable and like it comes back up. If you raise a palm tree in like captivity and then transplant it outside into the real world, it will snap.
I love that. I mean, I don't love that, but the analogy is actually really.
Yes. So it's like, it's just shows a really good, it's a good, I think as a parent raising kids to think about that. Like, oh, that was so sad that friend that was mean and, they're not friends anymore or whatever. That's such a hard, icky thing to have to go through in 5th grade or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that if you look at it, like it's really hard. Gosh, I had that happen to me when I was in elementary school too. And you know what, this will be something that's going to be one of those things. It's one of those heavy wins that, is going to give them the opportunity to grow. It's just, I think it's a better way to think about these things that happen to our kids rather than wanting to stop everything from happening.
Absolutely. And I think I've talked to a lot of parents about this, and I've yet to meet the parent who quietly says, you know what, I wish I could parent 10% more. I think everyone I'm talking to senses they're doing too much, and some combination of the judgment of their peers or just the belief that if everybody else is doing it this much, maybe I should, even though it's feeling wrong to me. And, I would encourage people, obviously go to summer camp. I'll talk to you about another idea there, but go to Let Grow and get together confederations of other parents, because they're out there. Your children's friends, parents, feel the same way you do. And what you need to do is have a group of people that are all going to decide, we're going to let the kids go to the neighborhood park and play for 2 hours without us there. We'll be 3 blocks away. And then when you get the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and all the other parents are judging you, you can all get shoulder to shoulder and say, yeah, they're going to be in the real world someday. And I am committed to making a strong and powerful young woman or strong and powerful young man who can make a difference in the world and will not cow the first time they see a challenge.
And I think too, like when people think about that, like, oh, abductors and all this stuff, well, you want your kid to be discerning. So yeah, before you send them out, you want to make sure they're with a buddy and they, they're not going, random places alone. And that they know that if, a car pulls up next to them, asks for directions, you stay, 20 feet away while you're answering them or whatever you want to do. You teach them to be discerning. So it's not like you just send them out with no kind of guidance. I like the whole idea. Julie Lithcott-Hames has this like step by step, and I talked about this in my book too, that, with kids, when they're 4, you're holding their hand and saying, hey, now we're looking both ways before we cross the street. And then they're 5 and you're standing next to them and saying,
Uh-huh.
okay, I'm going to let you be in charge of crossing the street. And you're
Yep.
there and ready to say, wait, you forgot to look that way. You're
Mm-hmm.
still with them. And then, by the time they're 7, they probably can do it. Maybe you're watching them do it from afar. And then they're going to get to an age where they're doing it by themselves, but you feel confident because you've been with them, next to them, you've watched them do it. So it's not, and I feel like a lot of times you were giving that example of the 18-year-old or leaving for college. I think a lot of times we accidentally do that. Certain things like driving, we're so methodical. There's the permit and we drive with them and we're sitting next to them and we're reminding them. And then they have this, provisional license where they can't have people in the car. And then finally they're allowed to drive, but it's like this, it started when they were 15
Right.
and it's like when they're 17, it's this trajectory, but we sometimes just do things as like a drop off. It shouldn't be that way. It should always be, we're showing them, we're watching
Mm-hmm.
them do it, we're feeling comfortable with them doing it, then we're letting them do it. That
Absolutely.
that whole path, and it really could translate for everything. I mean, you can have your 10-year-old or your 8-year-old call and make an appointment.
Oh yeah. Or
You know,
oh, you didn't like the way they graded your paper or your test? Well, the teacher gave her number, right? Call her. Talk
yeah.
to her about it.
Or the email. This is so funny. One of my book club groups, that the mom was saying that she got her son his own email address when he was like
Mm-hmm.
in 3rd or 4th grade,
Yep.
and taught him how to compose an email, asking a question like, I wasn't clear on this assignment or whatever it is. And I mean, again, it's like such a straightforward thing, but that's one of those things that she's guiding him at the beginning. This is
Right.
how you write a polite email, and here's how you find the email address, and here's the subject line you put in it. And so she's helping him so that by the time he's in junior high, he's fully able to do that on his own. But we can't just expect a kid to just all of a sudden one day wake up and know how to write an email to a teacher.
Exactly. So, I mean, I find myself, if a parent were to say, what can I do? My first answer is always less, right? I mean, the classic example is the 2-year-old, mentioned 2 twin 2-year-olds with identical parents are running in the playground, fall and scrape their knee. And one parent says, you're okay. And the other parent whisks them over, picks them up, kisses the boo-boo, so, does everything. The fact of the matter is, if it's a bad fall, they'll forget you said you're okay. My joke is, what if the compound fracture? They're going to forget you said it's okay. You're now on the way to the hospital. But you always work off the assumption you're okay. You got this. I believe in you. You're strong. And as I had a fight with my friend. Oh, that must feel really terrible. Tell me how you feel. What do you think the best way to handle this is? Which also implies you're smart enough to come up with the answer.
Right.
And then I will give my one other, this is my former financial person's pitch for summer camp. It has an asymmetric risk reward aspect to it. In other words, in your child's brain, she is going out on her own, without mom, without dad, without the teddy bear or the dog. Maybe the teddy bear's there, but the dog's not there, and I'm on my own. And that's like a tightrope between the World Trade Center. I am on the biggest adventure of my life, but the fact of the matter is, you can't fall more than 1/4 of an inch, because you're probably watched better than you're watched in your own home. I know I watch my campers better than I watch my own children, right? And I won't let your child play at my camp without someone watching them, but I would have let my kids at times, go and jump on a trampoline or something. But so you got the entire benefit of being out on your own and striking out, and all the self-confidence and even anti-fragility that comes from taking a real risk without actually taking the risk. It's like an arbitrage.
Yeah. No, that is,
I know that's like,
so it's asymmetrical design. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
Asymmetrical risk-reward scenario, or an arbitrage.
Yeah, it's so true. But again, even with that, I think parents' perception is they'll see pictures of like water skiing or a zip line and think, oh, danger. But like you said, compared to doing it like maybe with friends who aren't trained or don't have certifications, it's a better setting to do those things. And there is supervision, but there's a difference when there's some other adult supervising you than your mom or dad. You feel like more, you feel like you're more independent.
I'm sure you've had this experience with one of your children come in and explaining this unbelievably wise and powerful insight that her counselor shared, and you know for a fact that that's the exact sentence that you said during orientation to that counselor. And by the way, you've already said it to your daughter every year of her life for 13 years, but now since it's been repeated by the counselor, is like this, came from on high, from the wisest person in the world. Like, you have to resist the urge of saying, I've told you that 100 times, and instead say, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you sure had a good counselor there.
Yeah.
But you're right. Being supervised and coached by someone who is near peer, that's a phrase they use a lot. So a 20-year-old, they can, especially when kids get to be 13 or 14, they can start to see themselves as 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. So there's a kind of that's a milestone I can understand.
Right.
They can't look at you or me.
Yeah, the 50-year-old parent is like, you really don't even know what's going on. So whatever you teach me can't really be. Although they still listen to us, I have to say, even when they're, even when kids are, I always say, like, when they don't look like they're receptive sometimes, but they're still listening. Because I hear back from my kids, like, now that they're adults, things that they, that did stick with them, despite them saying, why are you the only one who doesn't let us have our phones in our rooms, or whatever the thing was? It's still like they come back and say, that was a good thing.
When they ask you, why don't you let them have the phones? What do you respond?
Just for that, it's for their well-being. It's for their, they need sleep, real sleep, and they need a break, and it's not good for them. And it's, it's disruptive to all the good things that we want happening.
So you don't start with it's because I don't love you?
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't started with that. Is that what you like to do?
No, actually.
Trying to make your life miserable?
No, I just do it. And then they laugh because they know from every bit of evidence that we do. And then since they're laughing, they're in a more receptive state.
Oh, that's a good, I like that one. Yeah, that's good. Well, my kids are all now old, and unfortunately,
too old.
They get to the college dorm room and then their phone is with them. So then they really have to know by that point how to turn it off on their own and be into the habit. Otherwise, it's just kind of a difficult thing. Okay, well, this has been great. Any final thoughts that you want to share for parents, wisdom about anything that you think parents can do? You basically said less of most of everything, and I agree with that. And that actually could make parents happier too, just to be able to be feeling like they don't have so many things that they're supposed to be doing for their kids.
Okay, I've got two gems. One is, I think I told you before, I have my mother was the most wise person I ever knew. And she had this trick, a little Jedi mind trick that she started, I think when we were 4 or 5. And she came in and said, Steve, the 3 kinds of people in this world. You want to learn about them? Yes, Mommy. Okay, well, there are people who are not very smart, and they'll make a mistake, and they'll make that same mistake over and over and over again. Does that sound smart? No, Mommy, that doesn't sound smart at all. Well, then there's smart people, and they will make a mistake, and they'll never make the same mistake twice. Does that sound smart? And then she hesitated until I finally said, what's the third group? What's the third group? And she said, well, the third group is really rare. There are not many of them, but they're the wise. The wise will see the mistakes made by others and make a point to not make them themselves. Now, once she set that framework, what group do you want to be in? You want to be in group 3, right? So for the rest of her life, she never once told me not to do anything. If she pointed to a behavior, it'd be like, oh, look at that person smoking their cigarettes. Here's the things that are going to happen to them. Now, if I want to smoke, I have to be in group 1 or 2. So she's naming behaviors. Oh, look at that person driving a motorcycle without a helmet. Oh, look at that person that just put a 5-inch tattoo of his brand new girlfriend on his forearm, right? Whatever it might be. And or look at that person that partied their way through their freshman year in school. Her whole life, she was just describing behaviors that had suboptimal outcomes. And then that made me want to not do the behavior. I was a contrarian. If she had said, whatever you do, Steve Baskin, don't do this, I probably would have done it. But by creating this framework, and so if you have younger kids, this whole sort of, you want to be in group 3. I mean, it's how, frankly, we talk to our boys about drugs and, illicit stuff on the internet. Is not that, look, people who tell you that there's no appeal to that in any way, shape, or form, have to address the fact that they exist.
Mm-hmm.
I said they had some appeal, but look where they could lead.
Mm-hmm. But I do think, and I, all the examples you gave, I think these are good. These are for like kind of those dangerous, sort of really important things that you want, like lessons you want to get to your kid. It's not that your mom didn't want you to like forget your homework one day and remember to bring it the next day. Those kind of like mistakes, those ones are kind of how you grow, because you get uncomfortable.
Yeah,
but like the kind of the wise things are, you look at the news and you look at your friends and you kind of say, whoa, look at the outcome of that.
Yeah, actually, that's
you know what I mean? Like the caveat, I think, because I do think, we all know that some people don't want their kids to ever make a mistake, meaning like get a grade under 100 or that kind of thing. And
yeah.
I think that's a different kind of wise.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to clarify that.
Thank you so much for that clarification, because we're all about natural consequences. Yes. Entirely. This is about narratives and major decisions.
Yeah.
The other one is only because I think this one is so cool, and because one of the keynotes we saw at this conference, this was David Yeager was talking about how to get teenage kids to use their phones less. And his study was the only one that ever had a successful strategy to get teens to eat healthily. And rather than say, oh, if you don't eat healthily, you increase your chance of type 2 diabetes by X, Y, and Z, or you'll be overweight. They changed it, flipped the script and said, hey, you know who's now working for the food companies? The same people who used to work for the tobacco companies. And they are targeting, making their food as addictive as possible. And they're not just targeting kids, but they're putting the stuff on the ends of supermarket aisles on the first day of each month, because that's when food stamps come out. So when you eat junk food, you're basically sending money to the man. And they found that this had a meaningful change in the behavioral patterns of teenagers. If you tell them don't eat the Pringles, you're going to say, let me eat the Pringles. If you say eating the Pringles is hurting, the people who need help and enriching the people who don't need help, it changed their frame. We've started to use that kind of language at camp about technology. Is that every time you allow that phone to grab your attention, you're putting, another half penny into Zuckerberg or, the folks from Snapchat's pocket, and they are controlling you. And you turning it off means you have power, and you are not allowing them to create this environment where they are making you into their instruments of wealth. And now it gives them permission to see take the phone away as not being a rebellion against my mom or dad, but being an assertion of personal power.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. It reminded me of, like, I think when my kids were little, and this was before phones and social media, there was this thing in third grade, and it was about marketing. And they talked about cereals and where cereals were placed on the shelves in markets, and how they put the Fruit Loops and the things, the sugary cereals, right where kids would see them. And I think it's really powerful when you do kind of talk about that marketing and how these companies are doing studies to research how can I get someone hooked in, whether it's to the food or the social media thing or the game. Oh my gosh, the science behind the games, and watching they're monitoring kids' brains and seeing how they can keep them on there. Well, okay, this has been so great. I feel like we've covered a lot of good information, and I'll also put just a link to your essay that is so good. I really enjoyed it. So I will also put a link to your camp, but why don't you just tell a little bit about Camp Champions, where you are, and just kind of the basics, and then we'll put a link to your website too in the show notes.
Okay, super short. Camp Champions is a 2 and 3 week overnight camp. We have about 50 different activities. We're on a lake. We've sailing and skiing. We've got high ropes course, adventure stuff. We're a co-ed camp. But ultimately, what we're about is what we call the 4 R's of respect, responsibility, reaching out to others, and taking reasonable risks. And we want to make strong kids and build the kind of friendships. Like in this next month, I will go to 2 different weddings of people who met at camp.
That's awesome.
And I love that. But it's if you have anyone in Texas, obviously if you're in California, you need to be going Madam Sunshine's camp. Everyone should be going to go there.
Not necessarily. You never know. Are most of your campers actually from Texas, or do you get a lot of out-of-state kids too now?
We get a lot. I mean, we had like 19 states represented, and every continent represented last year. But when people say, "Oh, we have a lot of variety from my camp," I said, cut out Texas and overlay it over New England.
Mm-hmm.
I would, if you did that, I would cover the entire Eastern Seaboard.
Right.
So when you say you're just in Texas, that's a big
We're
territory.
the same way. I mean, our campus mostly, it's like 90-something% of our kids are from California, and California is a big place, and there's a lot of different places in California. And then we have the smattering of kids from other places. So, well, that's great. Steve, it's been awesome having you on. Thanks for chatting today.
Always a pleasure. And, you're one of my camp heroes.
Well, you're one of mine. The Mutual Hero Society.
Well, thank you for including me. And I want you to say I so appreciate your leadership and your willingness to do this blog. I will tell your listeners that not everyone in this industry has your level of energy, but I'm not sure in any industry there are many people with yours. So you're much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast featuring my interview with Steve Baskin. I learned a lot and found our conversation thought-provoking and helpful, and I hope you did as well. As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Positive relationships are what make a happy life. So let's help our kids build the social skills they need now to have strong friendships and positive relationships throughout their lives. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week.